Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Pilot Principle, the podcast where we take a look at just the first episode of a series, the pilot, and then use it to decide if we should watch the entire series, or at least the second episode. Let's just get aside all the awkwardness and just address the elephant in the room. So if you are not already doing so, hit follow. Okay, on this episode of The Pilot Principle, we are taking a look at Channel 4's new drama series, Queenie. We aren't given much of a series synopsis on Sky, which is where I watched the pilot episode, but we are told that this is a sharp, honest, funny drama based on Candice Carty-Williams' novel. Okay, let's get into some credits. And we have a pilot title. Man, I love a pilot title. And the title that we have for the first episode is The Prodigal Granddaughter Returns. Love it. The pilot synopsis tells us Queenie is left shell-shocked when her long-term boyfriend Tom tells her they need a break. The episode length is 24 minutes and we have a series length of 8 episodes, which is fine because the episode lengths are so short. The pilot, The Prodigal Granddaughter Returns, was written by Candice Carty-Williams, who is also the show's creator and the novelist who wrote the book from which this series has been adapted. Candice Carty-Williams is also credited as one of the executive producers and music executives or something, which is random. And in terms of her other written works for television, she wrote 8 episodes of the series Champion. Joelle May David directed The Prodigal Granddaughter Returns, and David has directed episodes of Dreaming Whilst Black and a handful of shorts before coming on to Queenie. In terms of cast, Dion Brown plays the titular character, Queenie Jenkins, and Brown has starred in The Walk-In and Criminal Record. The pilot also stars Michelle Greenidge, John Pointing, Ameem Sheikh, Tilly Keeper, formerly one Louise Mitchell on EastEnders, Bella, Luella Gideon, and Joseph Marcel, formerly one Jeffrey Butler on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I can't quite work out what the TX schedule is. They showed 2 episodes this week and maybe they're doing 2 episodes again next week. But if you can't be bothered with all that faff, you can watch all episodes now on Channel 4's demand service, formerly known as 4OD. In terms of what made me want to watch the series Queenie, well, I have in fact read the book from which the series is based, and I didn't like it. Now, it has been a few years since I've read it, so I can't pinpoint exactly what it is about the book that didn't necessarily resonate with me. However, I did want to like it. So in a way, I'm kind of hoping the series will redeem the book for me. And to be frank, I wasn't even sure I was going to watch the series, but then I saw a trailer. My friend sent me a trailer and it looked quite good. And also I wanted to support diverse British programming, so thought I would at least give the pilot episode a watch and not judge it by my experiences with the book. Okay, enough book talk until later. Let's get into the first 10 minutes of the pilot episode of Queenie, The Prodigal Granddaughter Returns. Why the first 10 minutes, you wonder? Well, if you don't know, then conventionally, the first 10 minutes of a television pilot is supposed to set up the first act. And the first act is the start of the story. So within the first act, you expect the main character to be set up, some world building to be done, and to have some plot background, because at the end of those initial 10 minutes, the main character should have all the tools they need to set off on a new journey that we are invested in following, aka something that will keep us glued to our screens. So the first 10 minutes of Queenie goes like this. Queenie is at the hospital, legs spread, while a cold medical practitioner looks inside her cervix. The medical practitioner notices something and gets the doctor in, while Queenie, asking what's going on, is ignored. Post-appointment, Queenie, who works for a newspaper outlet, gets to work late, then pitches an idea for an article which goes poorly, and she's then told by her boss to essentially stay in her lane as a social media assistant. After work, Queenie gets her boyfriend Tom's parents' house. Things are already kind of tense between the couple, and they worsen when Queenie realizes she's forgotten their present for Tom's mum at the hospital. And things get progressively worse when Tom essentially sits there at this family dinner saying nothing in defense of Queenie when his grandmother begins a barrage of racist comments about what their possible future kids will look like. Queenie has ultimately had a shit day, as we have followed and seen, and in a flashback to the hospital that morning, we learned that she actually suffered a miscarriage. As she's sitting there and quietly taking in all the racial abuse that Tom's grandmother is throwing at her, her inside voice suddenly becomes her outside voice, and she basically tells Tom's grandmother, who is still going strong on the racism, maybe you'll be dead and gone before you get to meet it. Yes, awkward silence everywhere, and as Queenie runs from the dinner table, she walks straight into someone holding the cake for Tom's mum, and it, of course, smashes to the floor. And that is the 10-minute mark. And as an intro, my jaw was firmly on the floor when Queenie said, then maybe you'll be dead and gone before you get to meet it. I was like, it's not funny, but it's also hilarious. Oh, I felt the tension in that room, boy. What I really liked about the intro as well is that Queenie has got a consistent internal monologue that carries a lot of the narrative forward. So we understand who Tom is, what their relationship is like before we actually meet him on camera. Finally, I did like how they teased out what Queenie learned at the hospital and delivered it at the right moment. And after watching the first 10 minutes, I am wondering how things will continue to spiral for our main character. Speaking of main character, see what I did there? That is, of course, Queenie, and we don't really meet anyone else for long enough in the pilot episode to get into their character profile, so let's just kind of compensate by overanalyzing our central protagonist, Queenie Jenkins. In terms of Queenie's personality, we only know one version of Queenie, which is the one that we meet in the pilot, who is subdued, scattered, and scared. She talks about this other version of herself a lot, one that was happier, one that she wants to get back to, one that we don't get to meet. Queenie definitely has a lot going on, which is frequently assessed and fretted over in her internal monologues, but always ends up being kept bottled up and inside her. And that is one of the things she and Tom have argued about, her inability to really open up with him in their relationship. Speaking of relationships, Queenie has been with Tom for about 3 years and they've recently moved in together. It is mentioned in the pilot episode that she loves being in a relationship, and we get the sense that this want for connection and closeness to another person likely stems from issues with abandonment, which we'll get into in a minute. Seeing this in Queenie's character profile could cause the possible issue of Queenie attaching herself to someone too soon, especially during this quote-unquote break with Tom. We meet quite a bit of Queenie's family in the pilot episode. We meet her aunt, her grandparents, and her cousin. And family does seem important to her. Her aunt Maggie is the one who goes with her to the hospital. And despite recently slacking on visits to her grandparents, it does come across that she sees them relatively frequently. One person in her family who she doesn't talk to, however, is her mother. And we get a sense that there is a history of abandonment and distrust there. And then we see in the pilot episode as her grandmother and aunt try to force a reconciliation between Queenie and her mother, which Queenie is not ready for. In fact, she runs out of her grandparents' house before her mother even turns up. Christianity is also something that comes into play in Queenie's life, and that comes from her aunt and her grandmother, who quote Bible scriptures at her for their convenience. And Queenie, she's got a lot to unpack, which is, funnily enough, the tagline for the series. And now it is time for a quick interlude to see what TV and film life is looking like beyond the pilot principle. And of course, we always start with books. And have I read a word of Kazuo Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day since the last time we spoke? No. However, I have a reading plan in place now for June, so that is progress. And I remember my vow to read 3 books in the month of June, and yes, it's going to happen. I believe in me. I hope you believe in me too. Okay, moving on to film. Have I watched a movie since a movie day in the month of May? Yes, actually, I have seen 2. So the first movie I saw in cinema is actually a throwback, and that is Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, which had a 20th anniversary re-release very recently. And I'm a massive Harry Potter fan, but I've only ever seen the very last movie in cinema. So now that they're basically just doing re-releases here and there, I am all about heading to see them as soon as possible. And Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban is one of my favorite films / my favorite Harry Potter film. So I had an absolutely fantastic time watching this, quietly quoting and crying along to the scenes in the cinema. 10 out of 10. The second movie that I've seen in cinema is Bad Boys Ride or Die. So this is the 4th installment of the Bad Boys franchise. So there was Bad Boys, Bad Boys 2, Bad Boys, I want to say For Life, that came out a couple of years ago. Doesn't matter. Ride or Die was great. It was so much fun. I don't know if that was to do with the energy in the cinema when I went to see it, the cheering, the whoops, the laughter, but I had an absolutely fantastic time watching it. Martin Lawrence was absolutely fantastic. His humor really carried pretty much the entire movie. I really enjoyed the way it stepped itself up from its former movie. And you know what? If we can have 10, which will end up being 11 Fast and Furious movies, I wouldn't say no to a Bad Boys 5. Let's put it like that. Finally, in terms of television, I finished watching X-Men 97, which I had a really good time with that, to be honest. It was a bit slow at first here and there, but obviously the Genoa episodes, and then those last few episodes were also really good. And I like when things give you a moral dilemma. And let's just say that personally, by the end of it, Magneto was right. And that's all I'll say on that. I also watched the first episode of Bad Boys. Nope, not Bad Boys. Dead Boy Detectives. I didn't end up having the time to watch this when it came out in April or May. However, as it kind of loops into what's the name of the series? I can see him in my head. Looks just like Brandon Urie, gothic. Sandman, yes. As I really enjoyed the Sandman series, and I know that it's kind of loosely tied in, that's why I really wanted to give the Dead Boy Detectives a chance. But so far, so. But I'm willing to give it another episode or two. And if not, well, there are a lot of other TV programs on the watch list. You know what I'm going to say, but once more again for the people in the back, if you've made it this far, consider following the Pilot Principle on your audio streamer of choice. Then if you feel like it, you can find me over on Instagram and Twitter at Pilot Principle and TikTok at A Writer of Sorts, where we can chat about the latest in film and TV and books. In terms of what I liked about the pilot episode of Queenie, the prodigal granddaughter returns, one of my favourite moments was actually the last shot where Queenie is looking out at the camera and a ring of text messages surround her. Messages from friends, family, colleagues, the NHS. I just thought it was a really strong and innovative way to show that she was being pulled in 101 directions and really struggling to stay afloat. I also thought it was a very clever way to tease the serial arc. So yeah, very well done on that final shot. On the flippity flip side, in terms of what I didn't so much like about the pilot episode, I would say that we actually meet a lot of people for a 24-minute program. And a lot of the people we meet were fleeting and forgettable. And so because of that, I think it might have just been better to have pushed some of those introductions to the second episode, because it was hard to keep up with who was who. And yeah, it was just a bit overwhelming. From reading the book, I can recall that a lot of the high and by characters that we meet in the pilot episode are going to develop on and become important. However, from a screen perspective, it was just too much for one episode, and I honestly just didn't care about any of them just yet. I was more interested in Queenie's direct narrative to do with Tom and her family. Right, before we get into that all-important question, let's reload the track and remind ourselves of the pilot synopsis, which tells us Queenie is left shell-shocked when her long-term boyfriend Tom tells her they need a break. Do you know what? I was fine with that as a series synopsis. I think that was quite true. I do think the pilot as a whole leads up to the moment where Tom tells her that they need a break. So I think, yes, that works really, really well. In terms of writing, I think the writing was good. Fine. Nothing to report there. As a caveat, actually, that's good if it's good. Not everything can be excellent, but as long as it's not bad, then it's great. And if you want to know what bad dialogue sounds like, then I strongly advise watching Madam Web. In terms of setting in the pilot episode of Queenie, I think we had some truly gorgeous shot of London and Brixton in particular, and they did make a point to highlight the ongoing struggles of gentrification in the area, which I thought was really timely and necessary and worked in terms of authenticity. In terms of pace, God, I haven't really thought about pace. I didn't really think about pace. It was okay. Yeah, no complaints. I think it's the first drama that I've watched in a while that isn't some sort of detective mystery race against the clock type situation. So no, it was good. And you know what? The pilot episode takes place over 3 days, I think. And Yeah, it was well plotted, well paced. No complaints on that end. In terms of an end of episode hook, Tom, as you can imagine, tells Queenie that they should go on a break, but unfortunately he says this before she can open up to him and tell him about the miscarriage. When Tom tells her that they need to go on a break, he also drops in the fact that she needs to find somewhere else to live. So, when he leaves, we see that Queenie is inundated with messages from various people in her life. As I said, that was the final shot that I thought was just fantastically done. In terms of the serial arc, Queenie hasn't told anyone about her miscarriage, so we're wondering how will she cope and how will it affect her day-to-day life for the foreseeable future? Will she get the opportunity to progress in her career? She works in news. It sounds like she wants to be a reporter of some sort, but she's stuck in the assistant role, and it doesn't sound like her boss is enthusiastic about letting her progress. I'm wondering if Queenie will eventually sit down and talk with her mother, who she avoided meeting at her grandparents' house when she came for dinner on a Sunday. And I'm wondering if this break with Tom is going to remain a break. Is it going to be a break up? Is it going to end up in reconciliation? Is she going to tell him about the miscarriage? And if she does, will this affect their relationship at all? And finally, in the pilot episode, we do see that Queenie gets a lot of male attention. And so if things with her and Tom don't work out, will she start dating? And how will she navigate the dating scene, having been in a relationship for the past 3 years? And now there is only one question left to ask. Will I be continuing with Queenie? Pause for dramatic effect. Yes, and here is why. I really like the world that we viewed in the pilot episode, this sort of raw vignette of a black woman's life in London, and I want more of that simplicity. Not to say that Queenie's life or story are easy, but the highs and lows of that imperfect everyday is actually a perspective that we don't often get in British television, and I'm happy to support and watch. The second reason why I will be continuing with Queenie is that it's not a police drama. I know, there are no dead bodies. There are no dead bodies that have turned up in mysterious circumstances. There's no small town mystery to uncover. My blood pressure can remain at a normal level for the course of a series, and I'm all for that, and I think my doctor will agree. And the final reason that I have chosen to continue on with Queenie is that it's just got an itty bitty running time. Easy breezy, it can be banged out with no problem. But that is, of course, just me. And you might not want to watch Queenie if you prefer your characters to work a little harder to tell their stories, as Queenie relies on an inner monologue the way a fish relies on water to survive. It is very London-centric, specifically South London-centric, which you might not be into if you're not from ends. And from episode 1, despite some of the distressing themes, tonally it doesn't quite match up, and you may find that disconcerting. And by that I just mean that it's quite hard to tell at points whether this is a comedy drama or just a drama. Finally, all that is left to do is to give episode 1 of Queenie, The Prodigal Granddaughter Returns, a pilot score, and I'm caught between a 2 and a 3, and I can't quite pick which one. So here are my thoughts. So yes, it was really well plotted. I could almost hear the writing beats one after the other. I did like how much was piled on plot-wise in such a short space of time, so you were never bored with what was going on with such a character-led piece of television. I am interested in Queenie as a character, but I'm not fully sold on her yet. What let the pilot down for me was that a lot of characters were very briefly introduced with little to no context, which kind of just muddied the waters at points as you're trying to work out who these people were, why they were important, whilst also trying to focus on the actual main storyline. And finally, as a book-to-screen adaptation, so far so good. Whew, okay, now that we've hashed out the fundamental principles, will you be giving the pilot episode a watch? Or have you already binged every episode of Queenie? Third time's the charm, as I remind you to follow the pilot principle on your audio streamer of choice, and then to head over and chat to me on Threads, Instagram, and Twitter/X at pilot principle, or on TikTok at a writer of sorts. Okay, that's it from me. Catch you on the next episode.
Aww.